welcome to Jones & Company. I'm your host, Brian Jones. And today I actually have a co-host with me today, Christian Jones. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we're delighted to have joining us today for our guest, Mr. Pastor Jadorette from the New Covenant Baptist Church. Welcome.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and certainly to your listening audience, it's just good to be here on this Holy Week.
Thank you so much and welcome. And so today, for our viewership, we're going to be discussing what is the role of the church in a modern day society, right? And in the Bahamian society, we know the church plays a critical role, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but before we get into that, right, which is going to be, I'm sure, a very interesting discussion, I'd really like to know who is Pastor Jadorette. What's your background? How did you end up in this wonderful line of work on this mission?
Well, it started as a young man in Freeport, Grand Bahama. My life was literally going in different directions. And at some point, I consulted God for 2 years straight. And at some point, he said to me that access granted. And he allowed me to go off to school and prepare myself for ministry. And upon completion of seminary work, I did not return right away. I went on to graduate work and went to Fisk University and did my M work there, my master's degree there. And shortly after that, went into ministry there as well, and then returned home. And when I returned home, I did not go to Freeport. I came straight to Nassau and stayed here, and God just placed me in different areas. I was in Ministry of Education, for instance. I'm on the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And about 9 years ago, Bishop Hall was at the cusp of retirement, and I was called there to the senior pastorship of the New Covenant Baptist Church, the great people of New Covenant Baptist Church. And it has been a delight. I shared with them about 3 weeks ago how thankful I am that they have not allowed ministry to be a misery for me, and I'm grateful to God to be able to flesh out my ministerial gifts.
Sensational. I mean, it certainly is an honor to take up the reins after Bishop Simeon Hall, right?
Bishop Hall is one of those preachers that is just, he's just gifted in so many different ways. Preaching is just one of the gifts that he is noted for, but he is also a thinker. And I think coming into ministry on his shoulders has allowed me to see beyond many pastors my age, and I'm grateful to God for it. I'm literally standing on his shoulders.
Excellent, excellent. I remember visiting the church several times with my grandmother in my childhood years.
Yes,
certainly.
yes.
And so I must ask you to tell us a bit about the New Covenant Baptist Church.
The New Covenant Baptist Church is one of those churches that I would say is socially conscious. We are always in the community. One of the areas I'm very proud of today, with all of the lapse that is being talked about in education and our young people, we had the better part of about 60 children just yesterday in our Merged Gems and Nation Builders program. It's a program that has young men and young women, and we are doing our very best to shape them so that they are positive citizens tomorrow. That is part of what New Covenant Baptist Church has always done. We've always been a socially, politically, spiritually awakened church, and I think we are continuing that legacy.
Well, I think that the type of approach is definitely critical in a modern society
Absolutely.
like where we live.
Absolutely.
Right, and so I'm sure you have a number of ministries where you're actively pursuing certain objectives.
Absolutely. Well, at this point, what we want to do is literally rebuild our communities. That's one of the things that we want to do. I think from 73 moving forward, there has been a steady, deleterious effect in our community in terms of decline in social upward mobility and the kind of sound thinking that existed in the 60s with our citizenry. There has been a steady decline. Now, we've made major improvements when we look at UB and we look at some of our students who would have done major feats abroad, but I think we have also not capitalized on some things that would have been left for us. And so my aim now is to do our best to rebuild our community.
Reverend Jadorette, you mentioned that your church is a socially conscious church.
Yes.
And that we somewhat have digressed in terms of that social consciousness within the community. What do you think has led to that digression in terms of the social consciousness in the community at large?
Well, first, in order for us to get a great appreciation for that, I would have to tap into something that I mentioned to your dad some years ago. I think one of the problems that would have lent itself to the kind of deviance that we see in society today is the problem of transfer. Our forefathers would have transferred to our parents a strong work ethic for the most part. The idea that education is pivotal for us to move from one level to the next.
Right.
I think as we went from majority rule to independence, there, in my opinion, materialism would have taken over the idea of raising children who would have the kind of social outlook that speaks to the kind of socialization that they got in the home. And so I think if you want to understand deviance, deviance is where someone is not properly socialized so that they cannot interface with society. They don't know how to respect norms and mores. They don't know how to respect the rules of society. And the reason for that is because of the lack of preparation, the lack of proper socialization. And so I think it is not, and I've heard, Brother Jones, that the church isn't doing its part, or the police isn't doing their part, and I think it's a myth, an unmistakable myth, for us to think that it is a single prong falling down and not doing their part. It is a multifaceted approach, and I think it is something that we need to look at collectively so as to bring about reform and to have a new look in society. And so to answer your question, I think it goes back to the failure to transfer what was transferred to our foreparents, what was transferred to our parents. In many ways, we're not transferring it to children today.
Well, you mentioned the need for a collaborative effort, right, across the board. That I guess in most societies, it's easy to point fingers. To
Absolutely.
Say, well, it's your
Absolutely.
fault. You should
Absolutely.
do this, and what have you.
Absolutely.
Right. But when you look around the society, there's a different cohorts of stakeholders that all have a role to play.
Yes.
Perhaps you could speak to how the church is interacting with some of the other stakeholders in our society to try to address some of these issues.
Absolutely. I think, for instance, we've connected with some of our government agencies. We've connected with the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. As a matter of fact, our program, GEMS, has a strong relationship with the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. And what we do with that program is educate young girls to conduct themselves in such a way that is in keeping with what our foreparents would have left for us. And so that's one agency. We've connected, for instance, with social services. We at times do what sometimes social services would not possibly do on a day-to-day basis with someone on the streets. They come straight to us, and we're able to assist them with housing. We're able to assist them with food, and so on and so forth. And so we've always had evangelism at the forefront. We've always had stuff like youth programs at the forefront, and we're still continuing that today. And we connect with government agencies as we try to do these things.
I mean, the church has always been on the front lines, hasn't
Absolutely,
it?
absolutely.
Yes, it's a critical role for the development of our society. From the youngest levels.
Absolutely.
And so maybe we could talk about the youth for a moment, right?
Yes.
Youth engagement, you mentioned the GEMS program and the need to address certain issues, but all youth are critical, right, to the future of our nation, right, to the actual social fabric.
Yes.
Being knitted the right way. And considering that, after a certain age, it's only so much you can do.
Yes.
What are you doing for the youngest down the ladder?
Well, again, our youth program, we have a program called Nation Builders.
Yes.
Nation Builders and GEMS, they've connected. And that's the program I mentioned to you. We had right at 60 plus kids on yesterday. And with that one, after party training, you can come.
Okay, good.
And what we do with that, we try to teach them how to talk to people, the soft skills that are missing today, we're trying to infuse that in them now. Because, Brother Jones, I can say to you that we have quite a bit of educated people, but they lack soft skills. They're very technology oriented. They can speak the Queen's language almost flawlessly, but they lack soft skills. Those are some of the breakdown in transference that I talked about earlier. And so you have some people who can connect their subject-verb agreement, but they can't say thank you and please. And those things will definitely create a problem for us in society, and we try to make that a very important part of their survival package.
And even in addition to that, it seems that in terms of what we see today in our society amongst the youth is that violence has dominated social interaction amongst them. So from a behavioral standpoint as well, there must be some way where we can try and reach the youth in terms of teaching them that there are other ways of dealing with conflict and conflict avoidance, and just basically, like the Minister of National Security would say, teaching them that it's wrong to shoot somebody in the head.
Well, we had a program just the other day called Dare to Share. That program had the better part of 200 young people and parents in attendance. And part of what we wanted to do there is share with them how to interface in society without the kind of violence and untoward behavior that we've been seeing. And so the church, our message is always not just preaching to them and talking about Bible and so on and so forth, but giving them a package that will help them navigate through society. And that's one of our approaches.
But just in terms of, let's say, you have your program, another pastor in Woods Alley has a program, another pastor somewhere in Engliston has a program, and they're all somewhat scattered. Everybody is doing a good job, but in terms of being able to galvanize all of those efforts to be able to actually fix this problem holistically, do you think that that is possible? How do we do that?
I think it's possible. As a matter of fact, I believe there is now a clarion call for us to all come together. The level of violence that we've experienced in the last couple of months is unprecedented. And so there are some things that we're doing now. As a matter of fact, a number of us will be speaking at Aaron Bailey Park, I believe sometime in June. And in July, the Bethel Baptist Association, of which I serve as moderator, we will be looking at all of our churches coming together to do a revival, but not just a revival in churches, but in the community. We will be going, prior to preaching, go in the community and try to reach young people, try to reach unsaved people and bring them into the safety net of Christ. And so part of what we're doing is coming together now. And it's not just Baptists, it is an ecumenical approach that we will be looking at as well.
Yeah, that's a very deep level of community engagement. Do you see this being, I guess, a temporary situation, or are you looking to institutionalize this type of community outreach?
Well, I think the times call for us to continue to work hand in hand. Yes. And so I believe, based on what we're looking at now, we've got to not only stick together for this period, but we have to do all that we can to ensure that we put a net out there that will cause this thing to stay a suitable distance from us for years to come. And so as we work now, we pray that we can work together for years to come.
So, speaking along the lines of some of the, I guess, the constraints that you find yourself faced with, right? Because there's always, the lack of resources, whether it's money or talent or time. Where do you find yourself stretched, and where do you find yourself needing the additional support?
Well, programs. We need resources for programs. And so I think the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, they've been very kind, and they've worked with us for a number of years. But I think in the area of social services, that's an area that we need help, because we have people coming into our church on a daily basis, and we've got to feed them. And one might say, well, what does feeding them have to do with violence? And these are not old people. They are young people our age coming in looking for assistance. And if they knock generously, and they knock in a kind way, and they knock and nobody, after a while they're going to kick the door down, as Tupac puts it. And so we have to do all that we can to have resources so that we can help them, not only give them something to eat, but assist them with job placement. And that's something that we've done also.
That's interesting. So in terms of the job placement, I imagine capacity building is a component of that, right?
Absolutely.
Ensuring that they are ready to actually engage in gainful employment,
Absolutely.
depending on where they find themselves
Absolutely.
in life. Is there a role for the church to play there as well in capacity building?
Well, one of the things that New Covenant has done, along with the Bethel Baptist Association, we've always helped people in the area of education. We've assisted students go off to school. And so that's something that we will continue to do. As a matter of fact, we've got a Dr. Timothy Stewart educational luncheon. That program is literally designed to have resources to help people go off to school, primarily for theological training, but not limited to that.
All right. That's very interesting. So, Christian, you're hosting Issues of the Day. There's a lot of issues that are emerging, right, on our society. We're talking about issues ranging from gender, right? We spoke about some of the violence topics, but education as well. What do you think we should be looking at vis-a-vis the role of the church in a modern day society in terms of issues that the church can help address today?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do, when I speak to different pastors, different theologians in the country, it's always interesting to see that there is a mixed response when you ask whether the church has been delinquent in those responsibilities or whether the church has disregarded those responsibilities. And you have some pastors who will frankly say yes. There are pastors, there are leaders of churches who have somewhat taken a backseat approach to dealing with these issues. And then you would have some that say no, that in no way the church has failed, because the church cannot fail. And, they take somewhat of a self-righteous approach, in my opinion, to dealing with the situation. But I feel like what I've seen a lot is that we've kicked the can down the road with a lot of these issues instead of getting ahead of a lot of these issues. And we find that a lot of these issues affect gender, they affect the youth especially, but all of them revolve around the family. And the church being a bastion for the family and being a pillar of familial life in the country, that has somewhat been on the decline. And that mostly or mainly is what I find when I discuss that with pastors.
Well, I don't think we can make a blanket statement in any case. I could never say to you that the church is at the top of its game. Nor can I say to you that the church isn't doing anything at all. What I can say is that the church that I'm affiliated with, we're doing the best that we can with what we're working with. And we've got evidence to prove that. Now, can we do more? Absolutely. And to do more, just as Brother Jones indicated earlier, there is a huge lack of resources. And to do what you need to do, you need resources. But with what we have, we've been doing the best we can with it.
Indeed. And so how have you seen the participation rate of the families, right? We're talking about the family blocks participating in the church. Have you seen families coming as families, or and the rate of participation in the church, has it been increasing or decreasing over time?
Well, at New Covenant Baptist Church, most churches will tell you there's been a decline even prior to the pandemic.
Sure.
But at New Covenant, we do have a strong cohort of families there. We've got young and not so young, and they are literally strong participants in the overall work of the church. And so New Covenant, now we could always use more. But we do have some families who, and for a number of years, they've been working assiduously at the church. Not just mother, not just father, not just children, but the whole family. And we've got some of that at our church. I would hate to call names now because you end up calling the wrong names, but we have some families at our church that I'm grateful to God for, that the entire family is full throttle ahead working for the kingdom of God. Now, we could use more of that, obviously. But part of the problem isn't just that the church isn't doing its part. Part of the problem is that there's a family issue on the home front. The church is made up of people, not the building where we're at. And we have homes that are just troubled. Even though you see some people at church, they're dressed up, they're catching the Holy Ghost, they're going home to a myriad of issues. And I think the church is doing what it can to bring everything to center as best we can.
Speaking of that, in terms of centering, I guess counseling is one of the main, I guess, resources that a lot of people lean on the church for, whether it's marriage counseling,
Absolutely.
conflict management,
Absolutely.
and the like. What role are you playing in that regard?
Well, counseling is part of my background. I served as guidance counselor for a number of years at C.R. Walker Senior High School.
Okay.
I do marriage counseling at the church, and so that has been part of my background, and it continues to be part of the work that I do.
Right.
And we're open. It's not just for New Covenant. It's for the community.
I want to ask another question on those lines.
Sure.
Because sometimes seeking counseling is viewed as taboo.
Yes.
Okay, but I can tell you, in a modern society, it's less taboo than it
Yes.
used to be.
Yes.
Right. People are more open to talk about their concerns.
Yes.
I think you had a program that Dare to Share.
Yes.
So is the norm? Are the norms starting to evolve around that?
Well, Brother Jones, in most developed countries, let's just say you're walking down the street and someone dropped their wallet in a developed country. And if you were to open up that wallet, you're likely to find 3 cards in there. The card of an attorney, the card of an accountant, and the card of a therapist. Most developed countries, they welcome the idea of mental health care. But here at home, I think what we're finding is that we have a more enlightened society, people who would have traveled, who would have educated themselves, and they know the importance of mental health care. They know the importance of counseling and therapy. And so I think we have become a little more lax with the whole stringent approach that we had to it. It's a tad bit more lax now.
So if I may ask another follow-up question on
Sure.
this, because I feel like this is very important in helping us understand what are the issues and how to deal with them.
Yes.
What do you think are some of the barriers to individuals actually coming to seek counseling in the first place?
Well, to begin with, I think this is a small town, and confidentiality is one of the pillars for counseling, that what I say to you isn't going to be broadcast all over the place. And so I think part of what is hampering that is the fact that this is a small society that we live in. And we need professional people who, I've gotten to the place where I've had to refer people away because they are Jones. And if they go to Sue down the road, that's Wendell Jones' son. Well, that's all over the place. Just walking to the office is something that you probably didn't want people to know about. So I've had to refer them abroad for counseling.
I see. Unfortunately, I guess it's the nature of our society.
Yes.
But ultimately, there are
No,
trusted
I've referred
contacts,
some
yes.
locally, by the way.
As well,
But
okay.
depending on, the person's just very, very, very afraid of their issues being known in society. But I saw helping them as paramount. So if there's a way for us to meet in the middle, hey, I could send you somewhere and your stuff will not be broadcast. You don't want to be seen going here because of that. But I need, based on what you shared with me, we've got to put a help schedule in place. How can we do that? If I send you somewhere, would you go? And usually for those persons, resources are not really a problem. And so we've had to send them abroad for help.
Understood.
Do you find that the job of ministry, of your ministry, becomes harder and harder every day as we see new calamities in the world changing, and our country specifically becoming a more secular place?
I wouldn't say it's becoming harder, it's becoming a tad bit more complex. So you have to constantly read and find ways to address issues, because the kind of method that you used 10 years ago, society has evolved, as we shared some time ago. And so you have to find new ways to approach the problems that we are confronted with in our country.
Yes, we actually have to be very creative, right? These
Absolutely,
days,
absolutely.
right. So we'll talk about some of these creative ways in which we can try to shape the modern society that we want to see in the Bahamas after we come back from this break. Thank you very much.